Hey everybody, I'm Jeff. We're Two Cities Church, and you found MidWeek Worship. Thanks for joining us. If you're new to this broadcast, would you look below me? In the post information to this broadcast, you'll see a link to a YouTube video which gives you a lot more information about our church, about why we started doing this broadcast. We have been studying through the topic of humanity in the Bible. Actually, we've been studying through a bunch of really big theological topics. Last week, we kind of zoomed out and we talked about sin as it affects all of society, structural sin. Well, this week we're going to zoom in and we're going to take a look at personal sin. And when I talk about personal sin, I'm talking about me and I'm talking about you. I want to prepare our hearts a little bit for what you're going to hear about personal sin. Actually, I want to put you at ease about what you're going to hear today. I'm not going to wag my finger at you. I'm not going to point the blame. I'm not going to try to make you feel guilty. I want you to have a biblical understanding of sin, what it is, and how it impacts us and our relationship to God. To prepare you to hear what we're going to talk about today, I want to ask you to sing along with one song that our friends from South Africa are going to lead us. So why don't you follow along with Pete and the team from South Africa as they lead us in this song, and then we'll talk about personal sin today. Hey, Pete, thank you for leading us in that song. And now I want us to get honest about personal sin. If you're like me, if you grew up in a home hearing about Jesus, or if you grew up in a church, you probably heard the word sin, and it was close in the same sentence with you did wrong, you're a bad person, you did something wrong. And sin is ultimately doing something wrong and breaking the law of God. But I want you to think a little bit bigger about the idea of sin today. When we talk about sin, I want you to think about not just doing something wrong, but I want you to think about sin as not doing something right as well. You see, there are basically two types of personal sin in the Bible. One type is a sin of omission. You didn't do what you were supposed to do. The second type is a sin of commission. You did what you knew you weren't supposed to do. But maybe a bigger way of thinking about sin is to think about the person of God, the holiness of God, and who He created human beings to be. Our hearts were supposed to be pure. Our hearts were supposed to be perfect. Our hearts were supposed to love perfectly. And the Bible tells us that sin impacted all of us. In fact, I got a very short verse from the Bible that I'm going to put on the screens and I'm going to ask you to memorize. Really, this is one of those verses that all Christians need to have memorized because this comes up in a lot of conversations. It comes from Romans chapter 3, and it's verse 23. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Romans 3:23. Would you commit that verse to memory? And when you memorize it this week, would you replace the word all with your name or with your neighbor or with your sweet grandmother or with the kindest, nicest, the best person that you know? Because there is not one human being on earth that can say, I've never sinned, I've never done anything wrong. When we think about sin, I want you to think about it as a condition of the heart. And in order to drive that idea home, I've got a short video for you. This video is telling us that we're commanded by God to love, actually to love perfectly like He loves. And when we think about loving the way that God loves and then compare that to the way that our heart loves, you're going to see that quickly we don't measure up to that kind of love. So I want you to check out this video. And then after this short video is over with, we're going to have a real honest question that I want you to talk about as we wrap up this episode today. Check out this video, will you? All right, now that you've seen this video, hopefully it's caused you to start to think a little bit about your heart. God made you to be a representative of Him on earth. And the original blueprint for men and women was to perfectly represent Him, which means at your heart to have the same heart and to love the way that God loves. And there's not a human being, Romans chapter 3, verse 23 says, that has loved that way. So now I want to ask you a really raw, honest question. And I want you to think about this question and answer this question when this broadcast ends. Here it is. Is there an area of your heart in which you didn't give God all of your love yesterday? I want you to think about your day yesterday. And I want you to think about, is there a little area of my life that I didn't love God totally and completely? I didn't love like God totally and completely the way that I'm supposed to. And when you start to think about it in those terms, it becomes really obvious. Man, I sinned yesterday, you sinned yesterday, because none of us can say, I perfectly loved all day long exactly like I'm supposed to. I loved God like I'm supposed to, and I loved people like I was supposed to yesterday. Which means all of us need God's forgiveness and God's grace. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next week on MidWeek Worship.